March 7, 1945. Early morning light struggled through the dense haze hanging over a coastal plain in southern Japan. The earth trembled faintly under the weight of anticipation. Japanese artillery commanders huddled over maps, eyes narrowing at positions of their own troops, calculating ranges, rates of fire, and the inevitable confrontation they believed they understood. The air smelled faintly of oil, metal, and sweat. Soldiers crouched behind sandbags, rifles at the ready, scanning the horizon for the familiar silhouettes of advancing American forces. Confidence lingered, though fragile, built from months of holding defensive lines, of surviving previous skirmishes and raids. Orders were shouted, radios crackled, and in the distance, a low hum began to grow. Then it came, the first shells. Not from a single battery, but from hundreds, thousands, an orchestrated storm of firepower. Dust and smoke erupted, and the ground itself seemed to shatter beneath the relentless barrage. Japanese officers froze, pen still in hand, eyes wide with disbelief, as the world they knew disintegrated in seconds. The shock was immediate, visceral, and complete. In that instant, the calculus of war, the knowledge of enemy capabilities, the assumptions of strategy, was obliterated. And for the commanders who watched helplessly, there was only one realization: this was unlike anything they had anticipated. The battlefield had changed forever. By early 1945, the Japanese Imperial Army was a force stretched to its breaking point. Years of continuous combat across China, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific had drained manpower, equipment, and morale. Supply lines were fraying, and many frontline units existed only on paper, their nominal strength far greater than reality. Coastal plains, once heavily fortified, now contained gaps where artillery units were thinly spread, their positions visible to careful reconnaissance. Meanwhile, the Allies were refining their approach to late-stage operations in the Pacific theater. American and British intelligence had gathered extensive data on Japanese defensive deployments. Maps, aerial photographs, and prisoner interrogations revealed patterns in troop movements, artillery placements, and supply routes. Commanders in the Allied High Command recognized a brutal opportunity. Concentrated firepower could annihilate entire divisions before the defenders could react. The stage for massed artillery strikes was carefully set. Thousands of shells, coordinated from multiple batteries, could saturate a target area with unrelenting force. The plan relied on precision, timing, and the psychological impact of overwhelming the enemy. Every detail, from fuse settings to trajectory calculations, was calculated to maximize effect. It was a strategy born of both necessity and accumulated technological capability, a culmination of years of experimentation in fire control and mass bombardment tactics. Japanese commanders, on the other hand, assumed they still understood the threat. Decades of training and battlefield experience had taught them to anticipate enemy patterns. High Command believed their units could absorb the fire, reposition, and respond. Reports from frontline observers suggested the Americans, while potent, were constrained by logistics and terrain. Commanders trusted these assessments, unaware that Allied planners had already accounted for every defensive expectation, bending it toward a singular objective: total destruction in seconds. Japanese defensive doctrine relied heavily on layered positions and coordinated counter-fire. Divisions were deployed with interlocking fields of artillery and machine guns, supplemented by mobile reserves intended to plug gaps or launch local counterattacks. Communication lines, however, were increasingly unreliable. Radios were limited, field telephones were often cut by previous engagements, and couriers risked interception or death. Commanders depended on a fragile network of observation posts and forward units to maintain situational awareness. By contrast, the Allies had perfected combined arms coordination. Artillery brigades, supported by intelligence officers and forward observers, could direct thousands of shells with surgical precision. Innovations in fire control technology allowed batteries separated by miles to synchronize, concentrating fire on single sectors simultaneously. Calculations of trajectory, range, and shell type were executed with mathematical exactness. In practice, this meant that a Japanese division could be caught in a perfect storm, no time to reposition, no safe zones, and no immediate warning. The human factor further widened the gap. Many Japanese troops were young, undertrained, and exhausted. Veteran commanders were overextended, issuing orders to units they had never personally observed in the field. Morale was fragile. The Imperial General Headquarters had already acknowledged in reports that attrition, fuel shortages, and equipment losses were undermining defensive cohesion. While plans assumed the enemy would attack in conventional waves, the Allies were preparing a strike that ignored conventional norms, designed to overwhelm in an instant. From the Allied perspective, the strike was more than tactical. It was a psychological weapon. By demonstrating the ability to annihilate units rapidly, they could instill fear, uncertainty, and paralysis in Japanese command structures. The battlefield was no longer just a matter of territory or troop numbers. It was a controlled environment in which firepower dictated perception, and perception dictated action. As the hours before the attack passed, Japanese officers double-checked calculations, repositioned batteries, and reassured anxious soldiers. Yet despite all their experience and preparation, they could not anticipate the scale of destruction that would soon descend upon them. The final calculation, the orchestration of thousands of shells converging simultaneously, remained invisible until the moment it struck. The soldiers and commanders who stood on the Japanese lines in early 1945 faced a war already stripped of certainty. Men with years of experience were haunted by the ghosts of previous battles, Guadalcanal, the Philippines, Iwo Jima, but nothing had prepared them for the sheer magnitude of concentrated artillery they were about to face. Young recruits, barely trained and untested under fire, huddled behind sandbags, gripping rifles and staring at the horizon, unaware that the ground beneath them would soon erupt. Fear was immediate yet muted, an anticipatory silence filled with tension. Their eyes reflected trust in their leaders, yet a fragile hope that luck, or skill, would hold. From a tactical perspective, Japanese artillery units were arrayed in a defensive grid designed for overlapping fields of fire. Commanders believed their interlocking positions could repel enemy advances or at least buy time for counterattacks. They underestimated the Allies' capability to synchronize multiple batteries over miles of terrain. The enemy's calculation was ruthless: saturate, shock, and destroy before any coherent reaction could occur. The placement of observation posts, supply lines, and reserves, all carefully plotted, would become irrelevant under the onslaught. Terrain that had once offered defensive advantage now provided nothing but a stage for destruction. Japanese commanders faced the ultimate test of leadership in a single, harrowing moment. They had to make decisions based on incomplete information, relying on assumptions honed from experience that were about to be proven catastrophically wrong. Orders were shouted across lines, flags waved to signal repositioning, and radios crackled with reports of approaching fire. Each officer knew that a single miscalculation could cost thousands of lives instantly. The weight of responsibility, seeing troops they commanded vanish under a storm of shells, was unimaginable. Leadership in this environment was as much psychological as tactical, maintaining composure under the impending threat, yet powerless to alter the inevitable course. The artillery barrage that would annihilate the Japanese division relied on the cutting-edge technology of the time. Thousands of shells, ranging from high explosive to armor-piercing rounds, were calculated with precision using the latest fire control techniques. Allied observers coordinated trajectories with spotters, radio corrections, and timing devices to ensure simultaneous impact. Each gun's range, elevation, and rate of fire had been meticulously synchronized, creating a near-perfect storm of destruction. From the perspective of Japanese soldiers, the technology was invisible until it erupted around them, demonstrating how industrial and mathematical superiority could translate into instantaneous battlefield domination. For the Allied planners, this operation was a textbook example of applying overwhelming force to break not just an army, but the command structure behind it. Reconnaissance had mapped Japanese positions in detail, identifying every artillery emplacement, supply route, and troop assembly area. By concentrating fire at precise points, the Allies ensured maximum casualties and psychological shock. The destruction was not random. It was calculated to demonstrate the futility of resistance and the inescapable reach of Allied firepower. For the Japanese High Command, watching this unfold was a lesson in the lethal efficiency of the enemy's operational planning. The human cost of the barrage was staggering, yet beyond casualties and destruction, the psychological impact on Japanese commanders and troops was profound. Witnessing entire units vanish under a wave of shells instilled fear, disbelief, and a sense of helplessness. The conventional understanding of defense collapsed in real time. Morale deteriorated, and survivors were left to grapple with the knowledge that even meticulous planning could not counter the scale and precision of modern artillery. The shock experienced in those moments would ripple through every echelon of command, altering decision-making and sowing doubt in what remained of Japan's military capacity. The convergence of human vulnerability, technological mastery, and psychological impact set the stage for a moment that would forever change the course of the battlefield. The commander's shock was not merely emotional. It was the recognition that their understanding of warfare had been rendered obsolete. March 7, 1945, 7:32 a.m. A low hum rose across the southern plains as the first Allied batteries opened fire. The Japanese commanders, still confident in their defensive grid, barely had time to register the sound. Then the ground shook violently, dust and debris erupting from every direction as thousands of shells rained down. The horizon blurred with smoke and fire, the air thick with the acrid stench of exploded ordnance. Observation posts lit up with panic. Officers clutched binoculars, struggling to track the trajectory of the incoming shells. Forward units reported massive destruction, trenches obliterated, artillery pieces shattered, communication lines severed. Every attempt to respond was met with another wave of fire. In seconds, the battlefield transformed from a controlled defensive zone into a chaotic maelstrom of metal and earth. Commanders attempted to reposition units, shouting orders over radios that either failed or were destroyed in the bombardment. Soldiers ran for cover, only to find the ground itself unstable, fissured by exploding shells. It became immediately clear. The scale of firepower was unlike anything they had ever faced. Batteries that were supposed to repel attackers were silenced in the first minutes, their crews either dead or scattered. The magnitude of the attack left a lasting imprint on the human psyche. Officers witnessed entire regiments vanish in the space of moments. The carefully mapped defensive lines were erased, leaving survivors disoriented and leaderless. Shock rippled through the ranks. This was not a conventional engagement. It was instantaneous annihilation. Every assumption the Japanese High Command had relied upon, terrain advantage, layered defenses, troop discipline, had been nullified. In that moment, the war changed. It was no longer about strategy, position, or preparation. It became about survival against a force capable of overwhelming precision and unimaginable scale. The first salvo had not merely destroyed equipment, it had shattered certainty itself. By 8:15 a.m., the full magnitude of the Allied operation became undeniable. Thousands of shells had converged on the Japanese positions, creating a relentless, rhythmic thunder that echoed across the plains. Trenches collapsed, command posts disintegrated, and artillery pieces, once the backbone of the defensive network, lay twisted and smoking. Survivors crawled through the wreckage, dazed and disoriented, their faces smeared with dirt, blood, and disbelief. Commanders, forced into a rapid crisis, attempted to rally fragmented units. Signals were misread, messengers killed, and radios silent. The planned countermeasures, deploying reserves, repositioning batteries, failed before they could even begin. The battlefield had become a crucible of chaos. Each shell struck with exacting precision, leaving no room for improvisation. Entire regiments ceased to exist in the span of mere minutes. The psychological impact was instantaneous. Officers who had spent years mastering defensive tactics now confronted an uncomfortable truth. The Allies had anticipated their every move, their entire defensive doctrine rendered obsolete. Morale collapsed as soldiers realized that no position offered safety, no strategy guaranteed survival. Panic rippled through the remaining ranks, a contagion that spread faster than any physical assault could. By mid-morning, the artillery strike concluded, leaving a scene of devastation unlike any previously witnessed in the Pacific theater. The plain, once a structured battlefield, had become a graveyard of men and machines. Survivors counted the cost in hushed tones, their eyes reflecting the disbelief that had seized their commanders. Japanese High Command, watching from afar, understood that the magnitude of the destruction was not merely physical. It was existential, a proof that the enemy could annihilate entire formations in seconds, challenging everything they believed about warfare and their own capabilities. This catastrophic event would not only determine the fate of the local battle, it would echo through the remainder of the campaign, altering tactics, strategy, and the very perception of the Japanese army's vulnerability. From here, the story of aftermath, reckoning, and strategic consequence unfolds. The aftermath of the artillery onslaught was staggering. By midday, the Japanese High Command began receiving fragmented reports from the field. Entire regiments were wiped out. Artillery positions that had once dominated the plains were obliterated. Communication lines were severed, leaving remaining units isolated and without direction. The scale of destruction defied comprehension. In the immediate wake, survivors attempted to regroup. Soldiers crawled through shattered trenches, counting the dead, seeking comrades, and assessing damage. Officers moved among them, issuing orders that often could not be executed. Panic and confusion dominated the battlefield. Structured defense was impossible. The once confident commanders were reduced to observers of the annihilation they had failed to prevent. Casualty figures were staggering. Estimates indicated that thousands of troops were killed or incapacitated in mere seconds. Equipment losses were equally catastrophic. Artillery pieces destroyed, supply depots leveled, vehicles shredded by the concentrated firepower. What remained was a landscape of ruin, smoke rising from craters, the ground scarred by repeated detonations, and the air thick with dust and the smell of explosives. Beyond the immediate destruction, the psychological impact reverberated through the Japanese army. Officers questioned the reliability of their defensive doctrines. Soldiers grappled with the realization that conventional tactics, experience, and terrain advantage could offer no guarantee of survival. The operation had proven that the Allies could deliver massed, precise, and instantaneous destruction, a capability that left no room for hesitation or miscalculation. At the strategic level, Japanese commanders convened emergency councils. Reports from the battlefield painted a grim picture. The loss of an entire division within minutes was not merely a tactical setback. It was a demonstration of technological, logistical, and operational superiority that they could not counter. The perception of invincibility that the Allies had cultivated was now undeniable. The battlefield, once a stage for disciplined defense, had become a testament to the devastating power of modern artillery. The survivors would carry the memory of those minutes for the rest of the campaign, and the High Command would have to confront a new reality. The calculus of war had shifted irreversibly. In the days following the bombardment, Japanese intelligence and operational units struggled to piece together what had occurred. Reconnaissance reports confirmed the scale of destruction: entire artillery batteries destroyed, command bunkers leveled, and troop concentrations reduced to skeletal remnants. Survivors spoke of seconds that felt like hours, of the ground erupting around them, and of leaders who vanished alongside their formations. The shock reverberated beyond the battlefield. High Command re-evaluated the defensive posture of southern Japan, realizing that concentration of forces could no longer guarantee survival. Strategic planning had to account not just for conventional engagement, but for the ability of the Allies to deliver overwhelming, instantaneous strikes. Military doctrine, previously reliant on depth and interlocking defenses, was now fundamentally questioned. Reports compiled for the Emperor and senior leadership highlighted the vulnerability of remaining divisions. Even well-fortified positions could be erased in moments. The operation served as a stark demonstration of Allied firepower and coordination, underscoring Japan's growing incapacity to protect its forces or project effective countermeasures. Morale across the army deteriorated as units understood that survival depended less on skill or discipline than on chance. From the Allied perspective, the mission was a calculated success. Intelligence, logistics, and technology had converged to produce a decisive outcome with minimal risk to their forces. Observers documented the effectiveness of synchronized artillery, gathering data for future operations and refining fire control methods. The psychological impact on the enemy was as significant as the physical destruction, a demonstration of dominance that would influence Japanese defensive thinking for the remainder of the conflict. By the end of March 1945, the battlefield remained a scarred testament to modern firepower. Japanese commanders could no longer rely on assumptions derived from past engagements. The events underscored a painful truth: in modern warfare, speed, precision, and coordination could obliterate even the most prepared defenses before a response was possible. The seeds of doubt, fear, and strategic reassessment had been sown. The annihilation of an entire Japanese division in mere seconds was more than a tactical victory. It was a revelation. It exposed the unforgiving logic of modern warfare, where technology, coordination, and timing could eclipse courage, discipline, and experience. For the soldiers on the ground, it was a stark lesson in human vulnerability, an instant in which months of preparation, loyalty, and training became irrelevant beneath the weight of thousands of falling shells. For commanders and strategists, the event forced a reassessment of assumptions. The battlefield was no longer simply a matter of terrain, manpower, or entrenched positions. It had become a domain in which precision, planning, and the ability to synchronize firepower with intelligence dictated outcomes. The psychological dimension, fear, disbelief, and loss of control, proved as decisive as the physical destruction. Entire doctrines, once considered reliable, were rendered obsolete in moments. Yet there is a sobering universality to this moment. Across all armies and conflicts, the calculus of survival can hinge on factors beyond human anticipation. Technology amplifies both capability and consequence. Decisions made in calm planning rooms translate instantly into life and death for thousands. The destruction witnessed by Japanese commanders serves as a timeless reminder that warfare is as much about perception and understanding as it is about strategy and numbers. In the broader context of World War II, this event exemplified the evolution of combat into an era of total annihilation, where overwhelming force and rapid execution could decide the fate of entire divisions in seconds. The Allies' mastery of firepower and coordination demonstrated the growing dominance of industrialized warfare and underscored the limits of traditional defensive thinking. As the smoke cleared over the battlefield, one truth remained indelible: war had become faster, deadlier, and less forgiving of error. The shock experienced by the Japanese High Command was not merely a moment of tactical failure. It was a reflection of a fundamental shift in the nature of combat. The lesson carried forward was clear, haunting, and universal. The skies, the plains, and the future of warfare would never again belong solely to those who assumed they could predict the outcome.